When you clicked on this video, you probably imagined a monster as a bad person, a manipulator, a rotten society, an oppressive religion. But no, Nietzsche is placing a hand on your shoulder and asking you bluntly, when you fight what's evil, are you being saved or are you being trained to become it? Nietzsche doesn't speak like a preacher. He speaks like a psychologist of the abyss, someone who can peel off the civilized skin and point to the entrails we keep hidden. And right there, in the dark zone we always avoid, we meet an uncomfortable truth. Inside every human being, some motives aren't pretty. When you stare long enough into the darkness of humanity, that darkness starts to change you. It makes you doubt the familiar oppositions, good and evil, right and wrong, altruism and egoism. It pulls you out of the safe cradle of ready-made morality and drops you into the most dangerous question. If God is dead, what do we still cling to live? In the next few minutes, you'll see Nietzsche pointing to a different path, becoming dangerous without being swallowed by darkness. And if you miss the next part, you'll miss the very mechanism that makes so many people think they're good while living like someone taking revenge on life. Number 1. What is a monster? When people hear the word monster, most immediately picture a villain. Cruel, destructive, no longer human. But Nietzsche uses monster as a psychological keyword. The monster isn't out there like a comic book character. The monster is in you, and it rarely looks grotesque. It often looks polite, moral, and proper. The monster is the life energy you've locked away because you fear judgment. It's anger that has a reason but gets called bad. It's self-respect that wants to stand upright but gets labeled ego. It's the instinct to rise higher, but it gets labeled ambition. It's the necessary ruthlessness to cut off a rotting relationship, but it gets called heartless. Nietzsche loves the monster because the monster is a real instinct. And truth smells like blood and sweat, not like moral perfume, because he knows that what gets called chaos is sometimes the very condition that allows a human being to create a life with style and vitality. He wrote, "I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." In the language of culture and traditional morality, the monster is anything stamped as bad. What gets called bad is sometimes primal life energy, the driving force that makes you stand up, move forward, seize, protect, create, and dare to cut away what is toxic. Nietzsche calls these life conditioning emotions, meaning the kind of forces without which life becomes pale, powerless, fake. Here, we must distinguish two kinds of monsters. Otherwise, you'll easily misunderstand and think Nietzsche is praising evil. The lower monster is impulsive, destructive, enslaved to instinct, intoxicated with animal power. The lower monster is like someone who gets triggered and reacts instantly. Give that person a little authority, and they must trample. That person is like a fire without a hearth, knowing only how to burn. The lower monster can look strong, but is actually very weak, because the person is controlled by the smallest thing: a glance, a remark, a touch to the ego. The lower monster can't endure the emptiness inside, so it needs violence, power, and the infliction of pain to feel alive. This is what society usually sees and calls a monster, and yes, it is a kind of monster, but the lowest kind. The higher monster is what Nietzsche hints at, in a voice both seductive and dangerous. The higher monster isn't gentle. The higher monster is someone capable of hurting, capable of breaking, capable of imposing, and yet not dragged around by those capacities. The higher monster sees the darkness within without panic, without pretending to be moral, without lying to itself through beautiful stories. That person dares to admit the desire for power, but doesn't let power turn them into an addict. That person dares to admit envy, but turns it into training fuel rather than into slander. That person dares to admit anger, but uses anger as fire to reset boundaries, change a life, create a work, make a choice, and undergo a transformation. This video does not promote evil. Nietzsche does not advise you to become a destroyer. Nietzsche points to a truth many people don't want to hear. A good life that is powerless is domesticated. A moral life full of resentment is a life rotting from the inside. The path he opens is the path of capacity, the capacity to become dangerous and remain in control. The capacity to look straight at what gets called bad and say, "I know you're there." The capacity not to let the crowd define you with labels. And once you understand monster in this sense, you begin to realize something chilling. The most frightening thing isn't the real monster. The most frightening thing is the monster that gets denied, because it always finds a way back, and it often returns wearing the face of rightness. Number 2. What is the abyss? The abyss is not a place. The abyss is a moment. A moment when every ready-made meaning in your life suddenly falls away like paint peeling off a damp wall, exposing the rough, cold surface beneath. The abyss appears when familiar answers that once let you sleep, suddenly stop working. Someone who believed being decent will be rewarded watches the ruthless rise while they get used to it. Someone who believed effort is enough suddenly realizes there are games decided not by effort, but by power, networks, and timely ruthlessness. Someone who believed "I deserve it" gets slammed in the face by something unfair to the point of cruelty. Illness, betrayal, failure, death. Those moments feel like you're standing on glass, and the glass starts to crack. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. Nietzsche calls this the moment when the systems of good-evil, sin-salvation, absolute right-wrong begin to fracture. Traditional morality works like a pre-printed map. Religion, tradition, family, community, social media, everything is ready to hand you a script. Live this way to be good. Believe that to be accepted. Hate this to be righteous. That map makes you lighter because you don't have to create meaning yourself. But the abyss is when that map gets torn. And when the map is torn, the most terrifying question rises. So what are we living for? If you've ever had a moment like that, leave a very short comment. Which map inside you tore back then? And what kept you from falling completely? You don't need a long story. Just one honest detail, because sometimes that detail is exactly what helps you see when you changed. This is nihilism in Nietzsche's sense. He describes it in one sentence in The Will to Power. What does nihilism mean? That the highest values devaluate themselves. It is the shock of discovering that what you once called truth may have been only a structure that helped humans endure life. You start to sense how fragile beliefs are. You start to see that much of right and wrong is not an eternal truth, but a social agreement, a tool of power. Some other philosophers would try to lead you out of the abyss by building a new bridge. Kierkegaard would speak of the leap of faith. Camus would speak of the absurd and the spirit of revolt. And Viktor Frankl would speak of meaning as a task for survival. Those perspectives have value, but Nietzsche is different. Nietzsche makes you stand at the edge and look down because he believes that anyone who cannot look down will spend a lifetime living on borrowed meanings. Anyone who cannot look down will call their fear morality. Anyone who cannot look down will call their powerlessness virtue. What is the abyss in the language of science? The abyss is like the moment your nervous system loses its safety frame for predicting the world. The brain prefers stable patterns. It prefers clear reasons for suffering. When the pattern collapses, the body falls into uncertainty, like a compass thrown off by a magnetic field. You feel restless, sleepless, disoriented, even empty. But Nietzsche would say, this is an opportunity, because only then do you gain the chance to rebuild a model of your own, instead of living inside someone else's. And then comes Nietzsche's second line, the one that chills people. The abyss gazes back. When you look straight into human nature and into yourself, you are no longer the person you were before. Every deep gaze has its price. Someone who has worked in criminal law for years may begin to doubt what goodness even means. Someone who consumes scandals and online hatred all day may gradually live by reflex, losing the ability to be calm. The gaze does not merely register reality, the gaze also shapes the one who gazes. When you look down into the abyss, you start carrying its dust in your eyes. Someone who once thought they live for justice suddenly feels a strange pleasure in publicly punishing someone. Someone who believed they were humble suddenly discovers how much it hurts to be inferior, and that pain turns into the hunger to surpass. Those feelings were always there, but they were locked under moral storytelling. When you examine human nature, you see it in others, then you see it in yourself, and you can no longer pretend you are pure. That is why the abyss doesn't only destroy ready-made meaning. The abyss also exposes the truth about motive. When you still believe in absolute binaries, you can comfort yourself that you belong to the side of good. When those binaries crack, you are forced to face a more ruthless question. What do I really want? And there, things appear that humans don't like to admit. The urge to dominate, the urge to control, the hunger for recognition, the hunger to be superior, the pleasure of punishment. The abyss, gazing back, is the moment you realize the shadow isn't outside. The shadow is part of your structure. Nietzsche wants you to become dangerous in a different way. Dangerous to your own illusions. The abyss is not there for you to fall in and drown. The abyss is where you lose ready-made meanings, so you must create a meaning worthy of you. And if the abyss gazes back, if it awakens hatred, domination, the pleasure of punishment, the hunger to be superior, Nietzsche does not tell you to deny them as sins. Nietzsche tells you to look straight at them as raw material. Only when you dare to look straight do you know what is controlling you. And only when you dare to look straight do you have a chance to pass through nihilism, not by blind faith, but by a lucid strength. The strength to create your own values for your life. Number 3, the leap into darkness. Once the abyss has opened beneath your feet, Nietzsche's next question is not, how do we return to the light, but a leap straight into darkness. He places a question mark over what almost the entire Western civilization treats as sacred truth. Nietzsche looks into the history of ideas and discovers something bitter. Human beings are always seeking salvation. And in many eras, truth has played the role of redemption in the same way religion does. Truth becomes something to cling to, a pillar in the storm, a promise that life has order, foundation, and objective meaning. When God is dead, many people do not lose the need to worship. They simply change the object of worship from God to truth. They still want something outside themselves, higher than themselves, powerful enough to judge what is right and wrong, who is good and who is bad. Nietzsche sees that change of costume and calls it plainly. This is not complete enlightenment. It is the continuation of an old instinct under a new name. And then Nietzsche throws out a question that makes intellectual morality real, like a blade cutting straight through the modern person's faith. Granted that we want truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? When that line rings out, you understand Nietzsche is not encouraging deception. He is exposing an uncomfortable fact. Often we love truth not out of courage, but out of fear of uncertainty. Nietzsche distrusts whatever is called self-evident because he knows the self-evident is often the trace of a collective hypnosis. He presses further. Why not uncertainty, error, illusion? This leap is not meant to turn you into a fraud. It is meant to make you face something ruthless. Not every truth benefits life, and not every error harms life. Some illusions lift you, carry you through long nights, help you create art, help you love, help you act. Nietzsche is pulling you out of the naive dream that humans live by reason and truth alone. Humans live by stories strong enough to keep them going. In modern life, many people collapse not because they lack information, but because they have too much of it. Someone who sees too clearly the instability of the economy, the cruelty of competition, the falseness of relationships, and the fragility of health can easily slip into a state where they no longer want to do anything. A truth that is not metabolized becomes a toxin. By contrast, there are operational illusions that help you live. The belief that effort matters, the belief that tomorrow can be better, the belief that you can change, these are sometimes not absolute truths, yet they are the conditions that keep you from drowning in nihilism. Nietzsche is not telling you to live in lies. He is telling you to see the structure. Truth is not an angel that always blesses, and error is not always a demon. The question is what they are worth to life. Here, Nietzsche attacks head-on a major legacy of Plato and Christianity that many people think they have already outgrown. The idea that truth is always tied to the good, while error is tied to evil. This habit makes people treat truth as a moral duty and being wrong as something shameful. Nietzsche sees it as a kind of spiritual slavery because it forces people to kneel before a metaphysical standard and forget the more important question: does this serve the way I live? In Nietzsche's world, the first question is not right or wrong, but does it serve life? Or does it work against life? An idea can be logically correct and still make you shrink in fear. A belief can be far from absolute and yet make you dare to love, dare to create, dare to surpass yourself. Right now, I want you to be honest with yourself for a moment. Have you ever clung to some truth like a life raft, not because it made you stronger, but because it made uncertainty less frightening? If you have, that's okay. It doesn't make you worse. It only shows you are human, and every human has needed something to lean on. If you can, leave a short comment. I'm clinging to blank. Even a single word is enough. Honor, money, love. Naming what you're clinging to can sometimes be the first step toward no longer being controlled by it, and toward taking the wheel of your life back. Nietzsche suggests that truth must be put back into its proper role, a tool, not a throne. When truth becomes a throne, people become subjects. They do everything in the name of truth. They use truth like a hammer to strike others, like a spear to lift themselves. Nietzsche sees that type of person and despises it because it is a new kind of priest, only swapping the robe for spreadsheets, the Bible for citations, and hell for public shaming. When Nietzsche places a question mark over the value of truth, he is not pushing you into chaos. He is pushing you into responsibility. Because if there is no absolute truth outside you issuing commands, you must ask yourself who you want to become, what values you want to create, and what standards you want to live by. Nietzsche is not stealing truth so you can live lower. He is smashing an idol so you can begin to live higher. The leap into darkness, then, is not a fall. The leap into darkness is the first step of freedom, and freedom is always frightening, because freedom always makes you pay the price of standing on your own feet. Number 4. The will to power. Nietzsche pulls you even deeper, down to the layer he believes lies beneath most human actions, the will to power. Many people hear the phrase and immediately imagine a power-hungry tyrant, a dictator, a predator. But Nietzsche is not speaking of power in a simple political sense. He is speaking of a quiet life force. The will to power is the basic tendency of life to intensify its strength, expand its influence, surpass its limits, and shape the world with its own imprint. And in Beyond Good and Evil he writes, "A living thing seeks above all to discharge its strength. Life itself is will to power. Self-preservation is only one of the indirect and most frequent results thereof." When a seed splits the soil and pushes upward, it wants more than mere survival. It wants to rise. When a child learns to speak and to walk, the child doesn't only want to live. The child wants to master the body, master the environment, and be recognized. People want something stronger, the feeling of having force, having value, having a place, having a voice. A person can help others sincerely, yet in many cases, the act of helping carries a subtle pleasure of power, the pleasure of being someone who can grant. A philanthropist sometimes doesn't only give money, they also give an invisible message. I stand above. That is power. Nietzsche does not deny kindness. He simply strips the mask and shows that kindness can also be a form of soft domination. And this truth makes many people uncomfortable because it touches the thing they use to reassure themselves they are pure. The will to power does not appear only where you dominate others. It also appears in places that seem noble. Knowledge. Someone who possesses truth does not only possess information, they possess an advantage. They can define reality. They can declare others wrong, ignorant, backward. That is why Nietzsche is suspicious even of the thirst for knowledge, not because he praises stupidity, but because he sees that the desire to be right is often the desire to stand above others. You can see this in arguments. Many people don't truly want to understand. They want to win. Many people don't truly want the truth. They want the right to be seen as the one who has it. And when I am right becomes a drug, people will sacrifice relationships, sacrifice peace, even sacrifice compassion, just to preserve that feeling of power. Nietzsche would say the will to power can be so strong that it presses against even the instinct of self-preservation, because humans can endure suffering if that suffering serves a sense of meaning, status, or strength. Nietzsche is not telling you to become an oppressor. He is telling you to stop being naive about yourself, to stop living as someone driven by motives without knowing it. When you can see the will to power in yourself, you finally have a chance to redirect it. Someone who doesn't know they crave power will seek it in the worst ways. manipulation, control, humiliation, attack. Someone who knows they crave power can seek it in higher ways. Building competence, creating work, forging discipline, becoming a person whose presence naturally carries weight. Here Nietzsche brings competition into the inner world. Inside you, different forces fight for the steering wheel. A force that wants safety, a force that wants to shine, a force that wants revenge, a force that wants love, a force that wants destruction, a force that wants to escape. The will to power is not a single demon. It is the common principle of these forces. They want to grow, to be prioritized, to become the center. And that is why the real question is not, how do I get rid of power? Because to get rid of power is death. The question is, which power is holding the wheel of my life? When viewers grasp this, a cold kind of clarity arrives. Many crises are not only crises of circumstance, they are crises of power. People become depressed because they feel powerless. People become jealous because they feel displaced. People become addicted to work because it makes them feel important. People can't leave toxic relationships because it feels like, I still have control. Nietzsche doesn't heal you with lullabies. He peels back the deeper layer so you can see that pain has a structure, and that structure is bound to power. When you can see through that structure, you stop being its victim. You begin to have a choice. Either let the will to power operate in the dark and turn you into a reactive person, or pull it into the light and turn it into discipline, creation, and self-overcoming. And from here, becoming a monster takes a clearer shape. Not a monster of destruction, but a monster of capacity, of backbone, of someone strong enough to no longer need to pretend. Thank you for coming with me this far. If you're still here, you've already passed more than half of this video. So if what you just heard made you feel seen through, even a little, stay until the end. Because the next part is where Nietzsche turns all of this into a real path. How to become dangerous while keeping your hands on the wheel. How to look into darkness without being swallowed by it. And if you want the channel to keep making deep content like this, you can leave a like or hit subscribe as a quiet nod. Number 5. So what does how to become a monster mean? So, in Nietzsche's language, what does how to become a monster really mean? It is not a call to do evil, and even less a recommendation to become inhuman. Nietzsche is speaking of something far more radical. To become a monster is to stop being domesticated. To become a monster is to learn how to hold darkness without being devoured by it, to carry a dangerous energy inside you while still keeping your hands on the wheel. Nietzsche uses a ruthless image to describe what society proudly calls improvement, domestication. A wild beast locked in a cage becomes less dangerous, but it also loses its primal instinct. Nietzsche saw that traditional morality, especially the kinds of morality obsessed with controlling instinct, has done the same to human beings, making them safer, more predictable, less risky, while at the same time weakening them, draining their vitality, making them prone to resentment, and forcing them to live by subtle forms of self-deception. And when those forces are forbidden for too long, they do not disappear. They move inward and rot, becoming the sickness of people who live correctly, but not truthfully. Anna, my college friend. She was raised on lines like don't be selfish, don't think about yourself, so she was always trying to please her family. She chose her major according to her parents' wishes, chose a partner according to her parents' arrangements, and lived exactly like the script of a good child. But I noticed a lingering emptiness and irritation growing inside her. She began to hate people who lived freely, hate friends who dared to quit their jobs, hate anyone who dared to say, "I want." That hatred did not come from reason. It came from an instinct choked for too long, then turned into resentment toward anyone who reminded her that she had lost her own life. So, becoming a monster in Nietzsche's sense is a counterattack against that domestication. You need to become dangerous, but dangerous with quality. You need to be strong enough to hurt, yet choose not to. You need to be capable of breaking rules, yet set your own rules. Those lines may sound like morality, but they are actually the opposite of herd morality. Real strength lies in the fact that you can do it, and yet you are not compelled to do it. Real strength lies in the fact that you see the dirty road, you understand it, you know how the game is played, and you refuse to let it decide who you are. To become a monster also means learning to break rules without becoming a slave. Many rebels are simply controlled by reflex. They break things because they can't stand being constrained, but they also create nothing new. Nietzsche does not glorify that kind of rebellion. Nietzsche wants a higher freedom, the freedom to legislate for yourself. That means you are intelligent enough to see that the crowd's rules are only an agreement, courageous enough not to kneel before them, and deep enough to create your own principles. Take responsibility for them, and live by them, even when nobody applauds. This is where the higher monster appears, dangerous, yet shaped, having form, style, direction, discipline. This is exactly where Nietzsche stands against the improvers of mankind. The improvers are not only religion, but also ancient dogma. The improvers can also be modern standards, movements that turn humans into templates, communities that force everyone to be right in one way, moral yardsticks on social media that make everyone fear being named, fear being cancelled, fear being expelled from the crowd. Wherever people use right as a whip and good as a bridle, Nietzsche would call it a morality of domestication. It scrubs away the wild and calls it progress. But what it often produces is a person who is more obedient and more sick. Nietzsche does not only criticize, he points to a path. Instead of scrubbing the wild clean, you must learn to tame it in your own way. You keep the strength, but you place that strength into discipline. To become a monster in Nietzsche's sense is to become your own war horse, never ridden by the crowd, never thrown by instinct, never rotted by resentment. You carry the capacity to attack, but you do not live to attack. You carry the capacity to dominate, but you do not need to dominate anyone to feel real. You carry ruthlessness, but that ruthlessness is first aimed at cutting away what is cowardly in you, cutting away the habit of self-deception, cutting away procrastination, cutting away relationships that drain you, cutting away the need to live by other people's eyes. At this point, a scientific angle can deepen understanding without diluting philosophy. The more mature a person becomes, the less they are dragged instantly by emotion. Nietzsche says something similar in the language of power. You will never have freedom if you do not dare to become dangerous. You will never have a backbone if you are only good out of fear. You will never have an aesthetic and truthful life if you keep borrowing other people's morality to avoid meeting yourself. How to become a monster, then, is a paradoxical formula. You must become the one you once feared, in the sense that you must admit your desire, your darkness. But at the same time, you must become the one who commands that being, not the one who obeys it. To become a monster is to step out of the cage of domestication and begin building an inner order that is not based on fear, but on self-mastery. Number 6. Nietzsche's set of rituals for practice. If Nietzsche were alive and looking at our era, he would not tell you to be positive or be the best version of yourself in slogan form. He would hand you a set of rituals, like 7 doors you descend through to rise, 7 rounds of shedding your skin. These rituals make you more real, more dangerous, and most importantly, more self-governed. The first ritual is to strip off your own moral mask. You need to write down 5 sentences you often use to define yourself as a good person, such as, I always think of others. I don't like competing. I just want peace. I hate toxicity. And I live by principles. After each sentence, you must ask a more ruthless question. What is my ego really buying with this sentence? The ego often buys safety, buys love, buys the right not to be judged, buys the feeling of being above others. When you can see the trade, you realize morality is not only morality. Morality is often a survival strategy of a frightened ego. The second ritual is to detect resentment, the moralized resentment Nietzsche treats as a collective disease. You must observe your own pleasure when you judge. You must listen closely to the secret cheer inside you when someone gets put in their place, exposed, punished. You must recognize that sweet taste when you stand with the right side and gain permission to throw stones without guilt. And you must ask, do I really want justice, or do I want revenge? A person who lives on resentment often cannot build their own life, so they build their honor by tearing down someone else's. The third ritual is to become familiar with darkness in controlled doses. You must choose the most forbidden feeling you tend to bury: envy, the urge to control, the hunger to be recognized, the pleasure of beating others, or hatred towards someone who hurt you. You must write it down like a confession that asks for no pardon. I envy X because X has what I want. I want to control Y because I fear abandonment. I want Z to fail because I feel inferior. No justification, no beautifying. You only need to look straight, because the strongest shadow is the shadow that has not been named. When you name it, you begin to take your power back from it. The fourth ritual is to train the capacity to face temptation without collapsing. You must place yourself in situations that trigger your weak point within a level you can control, and then practice a new reflex, not reacting immediately, not drifting into it, not indulging instantly. You must learn the burning heat of desire, the itch to strike back, the irritation of wanting to outdo, and still keep your hands on the wheel. This is training the inward will to power. Power is not for crushing others. Power is for not being controlled by a small trigger. The fifth ritual is sublimation, turning ruthlessness into discipline. Nietzsche doesn't want you soft like cotton, because softness gets crushed. Nietzsche also doesn't want you to be feral like a beast, because ferocity self-destructs. Nietzsche wants a higher ruthlessness toward your own cowardice. You must use dark energy to do bright work. You must turn envy into training, anger into boundaries, humiliation into a steering force, and dissatisfaction into a work. A person who sublimates no longer says, I'm like this because of life. That person says, I will use this to become something else. The sixth ritual is to create your own code, instead of borrowing the crowd's morality. You need 3 short principles, but they must be hard. 1 principle about what makes you stronger, 1 about what makes you smaller, and 1 about what makes you fake. A person living with Nietzsche does not ask, "What will people think?" That person asks, "Does this make me larger or smaller?" It is frightening to set your own law, because setting your own law means carrying your own consequences. But this is how you separate from domestication. The crowd gives you laws, so you don't have to take responsibility. Nietzsche takes those laws away, so you can begin to grow up in the higher sense, creating value for yourself. The 7th ritual is the test of eternal recurrence, the most ruthless test. You must imagine that you will live this same life again, every detail, every pain, every habit, every choice, repeated endlessly. When you ask that question, all your self-deception falls away, because no one wants to repeat a life lived out of fear, out of pleasing others, out of avoidance. If your answer is no, you must look straight at the point that makes you refuse to live it again. That point is where you are betraying yourself. And if you dare to adjust that point, even slightly, you are stepping onto the path of the strong. Living in a way that allows you to say yes to your life, not because life is easy, but because you have the strength to carry it. These 7 rituals do not promise a sleepy kind of peace. They promise something else: lucidity. When you practice them, becoming a monster stops being a shock phrase. It becomes an inner discipline. You strip the mask, recognize resentment, look straight at the shadow, face temptation without collapsing, sublimate energy, set your own law, and live as if you must live your life again and again. And when you can do that, you begin to feel something the domesticated never feel: the freedom of someone with teeth who doesn't bite at random, the freedom of someone with darkness who isn't led by it, the freedom of someone who looks into the abyss and no longer has to pretend they can't hear it calling their name. Not everyone needs more advice on how to be better, because when you understand Nietzsche, you see that what is frightening is not the darkness. It is the way you keep pretending you have no darkness, and then let it control you through the most subtle detours. You need to become the kind of person who no longer lies to themselves, who dares to look straight at motive, who dares to take responsibility for their life, and who dares to create a standard of living without asking permission from the crowd. If anything remains after all this, let it be this sense: freedom does not come from being clean. Freedom comes from having enough strength to carry the wild within you without being dragged by it. You step out of the cage of should, not to destroy everything, but to begin living with an inner order you have built yourself. And perhaps the moment you truly become a monster is also the moment you stop needing to prove you are a good person. You only need to acknowledge who you are